Hello. So what I'll be talking about today is different types of DDoS attacks that have occurred over the few years, and how we will use AI and machine learning for network optimization for denial of service attacks. So this just talks about the threat nature and the current landscape of DDoS attacks that has dramatically changed over the last 20 years. So in the early days of DDoS attacks were mainly crafted packets using spoofed IP addresses, using amplification-based attacks, reflection-based attacks, mainly using compromised DNS servers or NTP or SNMP servers. But the landscape has drastically changed in the last few years. Even going back 3 or 4 years ago, with the way the world is changing as well, DDoS attacks have increased in great magnitude. So today, along with not just using spoofed IP addresses or reflection-based attacks, we also now have botnet-based attacks. And we're seeing a lot of increased attacks based on botnets. DNS and volumes have increased. The magnitude of the attacks has increased, and also with the amount of compromised devices that are sitting on the internet today. Everybody in this room has IoT devices sitting at home. All those IoT devices have very weak stacks on them, a lot of compromisations on them, a lot of CVEs open for them, and those devices could potentially be used as a botnet to attack a part of a DDoS. So there is a lot of devices out there, anything from web cameras, baby cameras, to digital video recorders, your fridge, your TV, could be used as a botnet and could be used to launch a DOS attack. So the whole idea here is to create a database of all those compromised devices on the internet, either being if they're IoT devices or even compromised VMs sitting on a cloud platform. A way, if we can create a database of them, put them into a database, and then feed that into when the attack is happening and use that intelligence to mitigate the attack. So also what we're seeing, some other trends as well on the internet as well. Today, where you can go on the internet, you can buy a DDoS service on the internet, on the dark web, for very little. The price of buying DDoS today, DDoS as a hire or DDoS as a service, is gone down really, really cheap since the last 5 or 6 years. If we go back 6 or 7 years ago, it might have cost €1,000 to launch an attack. You can go on the internet today, go to a booter service, and buy a service for $20 for a 10 gig attack, or you can go up to, if you want to launch a 50 gig attack, you can probably buy something for $60 or $70. So it's that easy today to launch an attack. And we're seeing a lot of these attacks are being launched not just by malicious groups, but also just by online gamers who might want to lock another gamer offline, or online gamblers who want to knock another gambler on because he might lose his money. So those kind of attacks are being launched as well. Thousands of attacks are being launched daily on networks across the world. So also another thing that we're seeing as well is trends as well, with the growth of the access interfaces as well, growing from the early days. When we went back in the early days, we only were lucky to have a 100 meg connection, or 500. Now we can have 500 meg, 1 gig, 10 gig access ports. These all add to the magnitude of the DDoS attack and the magnitude of the growth of it. So what we're also seeing as well is, with the increase of botnets and with the increase of a full stack, the type of attacks are getting more and more sophisticated. The attacks are growing in extent, and the attacks are getting harder to distinguish which is attack traffic and which is legit traffic. So with botnets sending realistic HTTP packets, TLS packets, using quick flood, quick encrypted, and DNS packet, it's very hard to distinguish which is what is good and what is bad traffic. And also we're seeing a trend as well with residential proxies. And what residential proxies are is the free VPN clients you install on your laptops to get anonymity, or you might want to go to another country and look like your IP is coming from another country. Those kind of software as well have open services on them as well, where attackers can use those IPs to launch an attack from using your own IP in country. So this just shows an example of a compromised IoT device sitting on somebody's home network. It was a washing machine, and the washing machine was sending 3.6 gig of traffic, and the guy was wondering, why is my washing machine, while it's on a spin, also sending 3.6 gig of traffic? So that just shows you the kind of devices, any device out there. We've even seen attacks being launched from parking meters, where an array of parking meters have been compromised, and those parking meters have been used to launch attacks. So botnets also like, the more access bandwidth you have, botnets love that. It means one botnet can magnitude more traffic instead of having an army of botnets. It means, though, botnets are much more work to them as well. And then this just slide talks about the residential gateways, which I hit on 2 slides back, where there's free VPN clients that you install on your laptops. There's no such thing as a free lunch. You have to be giving something back to the software company that developed the software. So if you're not paying for the service, you're offering your own IP as part of the service as well. So if I wanted to, if I'm in Ireland and I want to surf something in Sweden, I could install this software and then pick the geolocation for Sweden, and then I would be sharing I would be sharing a residential gateway of somebody's IP address going through their laptop to surf out. But also that service could also be used to launch attacks. And we're seeing new attacks being launched daily using this service as well. And what this service does as well, it's a real IP address coming from a real user in the country as well to launch the attack. So again, it gets harder and harder to distinguish what is attack traffic and what is real traffic that's being launched to the victim's IP. So that's kind of just a background of where DDoS and where we're seeing DDoS going from the last 20 years till today. And what this slide just talks about is the way DDoS is managed today and how it's implemented in the network, how we put safeguards in the network for different baselines on the network, and how we mitigate the attacks. So today, if anybody in this room look after a DDoS service, hands up. Yeah, so we got some people who look after. It's a pain to look after because you have to put different thresholds in your network. You might have a DNS farm on one side, they will have a different baseline threshold, and then you might have a web farm on the other side. And then also, you might, if you've got traffic steering across your network, or you've got a crowdfund event where you might have a Fortinet might be doing an update of their software, then there's a magnitude of traffic launched onto your network, and you don't know where the traffic's coming from. Is it coming from a known CDN, or is it coming from a proxy CDN? So this just kind of gives you the idea. If you're looking after DDoS detection today, you have to put all these different baseline thresholds in place to check to see if there's an attack happening there. To check if it goes over a certain attack threshold, then I've got to start dropping traffic. So this kind of service is a pain to manage, and we're looking at a way of automating all this. If we can automate this, put more intelligence into the DDoS detection, so you don't have to do this anymore. You have a kind of a plug-and-play DDoS service out of the box. So that's something we were looking to automate and have DDoS detection, much more intelligence in the DDoS detection, so you don't have to put those baselines in place. You can still put those baselines in place, but they could be a last resort baseline. So what I'll talk about here now is the 3 different types of DDoS attacks. So the first one is the main DDoS attack that we've seen for the last few years, amplification-based attacks using something like DNS, open relays, or an NTP or an SNMP open service as well sitting on the internet. So this just shows an example of doing a dig for Annie on nsa.gov using an open relay on the internet. So I'm initially just sending a small packet, and that small packet is 65-byte query packet, but that packet is magnitude by nearly 60 times, just one packet. So these are the way DOS attacks have been launched over the last 15 years using compromised open relay DNS servers on the internet, sending a single packet to hundreds of open relays for each one, and spoofing the source IP address of the victim. So the open relays then send the reply packet with the magnitude of 60 times back to the victim. So that would be kind of a standard DOS attack that's been launched. So it just shows you the magnitude of the DOS attack. That's all standard stuff. Even if you add DNS security in there, it can get even bigger. So this is all standard. There's nothing unuseful about that. So there. And then the fast protection against amplification attacks. While relatively basic DNS amplification, we're still seeing an awful lot of it today. We see a lot of mix of, if gamers are attacking other gamers, it's a cheap way of doing a big high-volume attack on your network. We also see it as a mix as well. When we're seeing different attack vectors, you might have an attack with DNS, and you also might have a mix of botnet attacks thrown in there as well, using amplification. So we're still seeing it today, amplification attacks, because there's so many compromised devices on the internet, so many counters like Microtech routers with open DNS relay on them. They can be easily used for these kind of attacks. So this one just shows you how we would mitigate that attack today traditionally. We would use the 5-tuple, look at all the information that we're gathering from the telemetry of the network, and from the telemetry net flow information or packet mirroring information, we're pulling that information in, and we can match based on the protocol header, like 17, which would be UDP. The source port would be destination source port is in. And this language tool I'm using here is just part of our language tool that we use. It's similar to Python. It's just doing a match on the different fields in the actual packet header as well. So we're matching on those different fields, and that will be a straightforward rule to check then any of those different DNS destination ports. Any of them I'm getting, I could act on that information then. So what we're looking then to is if we can extend this further by putting more intelligence in there, and say putting all the compromised open relays that we're seeing during the attack, IPs in there as well. Can we put fragmentation in there? Can we put known proxy residential information in there? Can we know any other compromised devices in there as well? So what we're looking to is extend that then to adding much more complexity to the actual match rule for detection rule for DOS. So in this rule, we're just looking for protocol UDP again, but this time we're looking for port source is 0, and what that for us means is fragmented. So we always see that as well in DNS attacks. The packet is too big to send, it's bigger than the MTU, the reply from the open relay. So what the open relay do is then it fragments the packets, and because it's fragmented as well, it's either harder to see it as not DNS traffic. So what we have a rule to look at any UDP fragment packets, which also fragment packets, just before I go on, fragment packets are legit traffic as well. It could be coming from a legit DNS server as well. And in this rule here is we're looking for any genome open amplifiers that are open amplifiers on the internet which are not part of the other lists at the bottom, not part of public DNS servers, not part of DNS root servers, or not part of known good DNS servers for that specific network. So we're putting more intelligence in there on the detection rule for the DOS attack, and that gives us a much more better hit profile, again, because we know either we've seen attacks in the past from those open amplifiers, or we found those open amplifiers on the internet. And how do we find them on the internet? What we're doing is we're crawling the internet for every single IP address on the internet. We're crawling across it every few days, and we're looking for compromised vulnerabilities on those IP addresses on the internet. Once we fingerprint a specific compromised device, IoT device, or a compromised VM or server on the internet, we will look to see if there's any open CVEs, any compromised ports on that device. We'll check the TLS header, we'll check if it's Apache, what version of Apache it is it a compromised version? All that information, we push that into a database then, and we use that to feed into the detection and mitigation of the attack that's happening on the internet. So that's our crawling. We also crawl the usable space of the IPv6 address space today. We couldn't crawl it all. We'd be here a few hundred years. And we take in DOS samples from our threat alliance associated as well. So we're taking in threat information, any attacks that we've seen in the past from our alliances, and we're feeding that information into the database as well. And we have honeypots positioned across the internet where we're trying to get in attacks to analyze different attacks that are currently going on today. So that's what this all gives you then. It gives you an automated way and a more trustful way to detect and mitigate the attack, because you're fingerprinting the different offenders on the internet, the different open relays, the compromised devices on the internet, and you have all that details in a database you can use for detection. So that's kind of talking about reflection and how we kind of automate that process. This one then just talks about botnet attacks and the attacks that we've seen magnitude over the last few years. So this gives an example of a botnet attack using TCP. The botnet attack was an attack that we saw a few months ago. It was using 4,000 different botnet sources. It was coming from, it was getting a magnitude of nearly 120 gigs, 16 million packets, and the attack vector was mainly using botnet, TCP, and the TCP packets were encrypted as well. So it was very hard to distinguish what was good TCP and what was not. Also, the ports were randomized, so it was a kind of attack across the board. Also, one thing we did notice as well is we categorize as well the different TTLs. So we're fingerprinting as well. So we're looking for, is it Unix-based, based on the TTL, is it Windows or is it Cisco? And we also saw from this attack as well, these were coming from compromised devices with Unix stacks on them, but the devices weren't that very far away if you look at the TTL fields that are on some of the devices there. The TTL fields were pretty close there, so this attack bots, some of the attacks were mainly, could have been in country or pretty close to that network, or could have even been on this own network as well. And this just breaks down then how we categorize the different botnets and tags that we put in a database for categorizing those different devices that could be used and launched in an attack. So we put in different, we categorize it, is it a webcam, is it a digital video recorder, is it a IPTV, is it a compromised device on a cloud platform, and so forth. So we have all the categories in place. And we also categorize the vendor as well. We'll poll for the fingerprinting information to get for the vendor information in there as well. And we'll get the actual versions of the different services that are running for the open ports on there as well. So that's how we categorize that information. And then we can break down then into an example here was a digital video recorder in Japan that was being used for an attack. And we have the different services that are on there. And also what else is sitting in the network as well. If that digital video recorder is sitting behind a Microtech router, maybe the Microtech router is compromised, and there's a digital video recorder sitting behind there, that might also be compromised, or there might be a webcam sitting behind there as well. So all these services are open to the internet and are compromised and are launching attacks to the different victims on the internet. So that's how we categorize the different botnet devices. And then you can break down then and you can see the actual fingerprinting of the information and services that are running on the different botnets. So that gives you an idea what kind of attack it would launch, how we would mitigate that attack and how we would push filters in place to mitigate the actual attack itself. So an example there, we've got a service running on the internet on a compromised device that hasn't been updated since 2015. And then this is another one showing a CVE for a SSH service that's running on there as well. So you have a full breakdown of the different devices, compromised devices, what vulnerability they have, and how they could be compromised and how they could be launched for an attack. And then, so this is the kind of the machine learning part of it, and where it brings in the automation instead of having to implement all those baseline thresholds, rate limiting thresholds that you can implement across your network. With this kind of machine learning, you can put this into your network. It can look at the DOS attacks. You can still use your baseline for last resort, And it can distinguish your attacks over the standard 5-tuple matching that we had in the past, because the 5-tuple matching gives a high false positive rate and doesn't really work when you've got changes in flow in your network, changes of bandwidth in your network, changing of, if you've got a crowdfunding, like I talked about earlier on, if there's a new update for Call of Duty or something like that, can cause a lot of traffic trolled on your network. Okay, so my last attack I'm going to talk about then is proxy-based attacks. So we've seen a magnitude of proxy-based attacks just in the last year or two. And again, these attacks are targeting countries themselves or political organizations in the country as well. So there's a lot of attacks across Scandinavia over the last year or so. Attacks launched from groups like No Name, and No Name, what they're using as well, they're not just using open reflectors, or they're not just using botnets, they're actually using VPN proxy residential gateways, which are hard to distinguish from real traffic because they're coming from real devices, launching in the attack, and it's hard to distinguish, and they could also launch the attack from in country as well, if the VPN client is installed in that country as well. So threat factor and primary attack types that are used they're sending real crafted HTTP and TLS packets into the network. So again, you can't look deeper into the packet, you can't distinguish if it's what's actually in the packet, and they're also sending actual real GET or POST requests to the back-end system or to the front-end system, which causes a lot of churn into the back-end system. So if you do a GET or POST request to a web server, that web server then has to go to its Postgres back-end system to do some churn. That's causing higher magnitude on the web server itself and the back-end system to cause more denial of service attack. So these kind of attacks are being launched more and more today. So the usual way to mitigate these kind of residential proxies attacks is if you're in Sweden and you have a website for Sweden, it's been attacked. What they do is they'll lock down that website just to allow IPs from Sweden during that attack period. But what can happen there as well is the attacker itself could launch the attack from IPs in Sweden or from geo IPs using the residential proxies IPs if people unknowingly have the client installed in their laptops, and as well is because the magnitude of the attack is low and the sophistication of the attack is high, meaning it's doing a high churn post or GET request to the web service, it can cause a lot of damage on the network. So what we do there as well is we catalog and maintain a database of all residential proxy IPs that are on the internet today. And we use that database then to mitigate these kind of attacks. So that's that. And one other thing I just want to talk about, I think I have another few minutes, is attack detection times. So generally during DOS attacks today, or in the past, telemetry is pulled from the network to see what flows are going through the attack, and that flow information then is used to analyze the attack, to deep into the flow information to try to distinguish who is the good actor and who's the bad actor of that flow. But that flow information is run on the router itself, is not run on the line card, is run in the CPU itself. And that flow information then has a cache. And the cache then, once that cache fills up, the information is sent then to the back-end system for attack detection and then mitigation. And that system can be very slow. It can be sometimes 30 to 60 seconds before you actually get the flow information off the router to distinguish the attack. So there has been some work in the last 2 years to help to improve this. And what's been done is to get telemetry moved onto the actual line card itself. So the first one of that would be sample packet mirroring. Sample packet mirroring is the exact same as mirroring. Instead of having one-to-one mirror of a packet, you could send 1 in 1,000 of a packet. So you're sending 1 in 1,000, full copy of the packet header up to 256 bytes, depending on the implementation. And you're sending that back to your DDoS detection system. Your DDoS detection system then is detecting the attack then instantaneous within a few seconds. Within about 20 seconds, you've already detected and mitigated the attack. And there is some other work as well with IPFX 315, which is the evolution of IPFX after 10, which is also moving IPFX as well into a much faster response time as well. So that's on the, this just shows of an attack that was used for detection time and mitigation time of the attack. There was just a 25-second, 30-second difference in the detection time of the attack itself from using sample packet mirroring to overusing traditional NetFlow. And that's nearly finished up. And one other thing, this just talks about the DDOS system that we use in Nokia, how we put it all together and how we pull in the information. I talked about our web crawler up here at the top. Our web crawler crawls the internet, calls the full internet space every 7 days, categorizes all IoT devices that it finds on the internet, looks for known vulnerabilities in those devices, then uses that information for attack mitigation. And then what also we use as well is we use your own network to mitigate the attack. So if you've got new enough routers, Juniper, Cisco, or Nokia routers, we can push mitigation filters onto your attack edge, onto your internet edge, or even your access edge if you get attacks coming from your access side as well. And that's about it. Any questions? And thank you for listening to me.
So we have some time for questions. Any questions for Patrick?
Yeah. The first question from Mente is someone is wondering if you have seen any attacks that you can attribute to the CUPS vulnerability from last month, that this was the vector to take over the machine?
Yeah, there was a CUPS vulnerability release last month, and there was an alert release saying there was an attack, but we haven't seen any attacks launch yet so far from it. But it's still new. There will be attacks. Usually when you see these things, they will happen.
Any more questions for Patrick?
Then we have one more from Mente. Someone is wondering, irrespective of the interval, do you see any ethical considerations associated with polling all of these devices for fingerprinting?
Yep. We'll poll them similar that we do to Google. So we'll scan the internet. If we see a compromised device on the internet, we will take in that information and just categorize that information. We're not trying to hack the device. We're just looking for the TLS fingerprint, and that's all the information we're getting off. We're not trying to break into the device to see itself if it could be hacked or could be a botnet. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.